And then within 20 minutes of this conversation, I got really curious. Within 2 weeks of the growth project, I was completely sold that this guy is going to be a crazy winner.
Peter Saddington, your big game hunter. And guys, we have our sights on someone special
Only
today.
a mother could invest in this idea. What the hell?
Made this like super artistic.
That is actually absolutely correct. And that's a very, very astute assessment, actually.
Welcome everybody to VC Hunting with Peter Saddington. I am super excited for our very first interview. We are big game hunting today, and we have Eric BAHN from Hustle Fund on the line. A little bit of information about Eric BAHN. He is a 500 Startups venture partner, a previous product manager of Facebook and Instagram, and he created a startup, a company called Beat the GMAT, and that was acquired in 2012. Thanks so much, Eric, for joining the show.
Yeah, thank you. And you missed the best detail too, the biography. So I'm now a co-founder and general partner at Hustle Fund, and very excited and honored actually to be part of the Yen journey as one of your earlier investors.
Yes. So we have to add a small disclosure there. Eric BAHN and Hustle Fund are investors of a startup that I'm working with, and we'll leave it right there. But Eric, let's just jump right into some of the questions. We want to get some context around your experience, your stories in venture capital. So give us a little bit of context. What got you into venture capital, and what are some of the specifics around that?
Yeah, so as you mentioned in the brief bio, I come from an operating background. So before venture, started my own companies, had some successes, had some failures. And out of that collective experience, I think was born a distaste and maybe straight up hatred of most venture capitalists. So, I was lucky enough to be able to bootstrap most of my businesses and avoid institutional venture capital. And over time, I just found that the social contract between VCs and founders was fundamentally broken. I mean, it felt like an asymmetric power dynamic where VCs are sitting on one side of a table, I'm sitting on the other as the founder, and I'm begging for cash. And VCs, because they're controlling a very exclusive pool of capital, could treat me in however way that they wanted to treat me, which is often not that great. So as I was sort of winding down my operating career, I was fortunate to be an EIR at an accelerator fund called 500 Startups. And that's actually where I started to understand the VC side of the business and saw an opportunity to work with some of my close collaborators on launching a fund that has a different model for how we collaborate with founders, hopefully trying to solve some of the institutional problems we see in terms of that relationship, the power dynamics, and happy to talk about that too.
Well, I mean, you thanks so much, Eric, for the great introduction. You dropped a lot of interesting bombs here, and I'm just going to fill in a little bit of context for our listeners out there. Hustle Fund, obviously co-founded by yourself and Elizabeth Yin and Xian Ko, who is out in Singapore. And it's interesting that you've already tapped into one of the first things that I found when I went to Hustle Fund, the website. And on the website, you said, and I'm quoting it here, it says, "We invest in hilariously early hustlers." Hilariously early hustlers. So I want you to explain that first and foremost. But what's interesting about that, knowing a little bit about you, Eric, is that you said you had a distaste and hatred for the way that you had experienced venture capital in the beginning. So obviously you and Elizabeth and Xian wanted to do it differently. So walk us through, first off, what are hilariously early startups, hustlers? And secondly, how are you guys doing it differently from the distasteful and hatred experiences that you had in the beginning?
Awesome. I'm glad you're holding me accountable to my own quotes. It's going to get me in trouble later. So we're in the business of pre-seed investing. That's the stage that Hustle Fund invests. So pre-seed investments are some of the earliest tranches of capital that founders are trying to raise to get their startup going. So oftentimes it's just the founders with a strong idea or opinion on what they want to serve on market with a product or service, maybe a little bit of traction, maybe a little bit of a prototype or MVP. But for us, we find that the most common co-investors in this round, which is usually just a few $100,000 to get going, is family members and angel investors. Very few institutional venture capital funds. So we're trying to design our fund to be one of the earlier tranches of capital providers, I guess, for early stage founders. That's what I mean by hilariously early. It's definitely before product market fit or before even the product is really fully formed.
And another way to look at that maybe is that, and I think you really pinpointed it when it comes to the early investors, it's really just angels and family, maybe friends, if you can convince them. I mean, if you're hilariously early stage, then maybe it's the same vein as like, this is a face only a mother could love. Only a mother could invest in, only a mother could invest in this idea,
Well, I'll say this, as a VC in this space, it's a very optimistic way of living life, or it at least conditions optimism, because most of the questions we ask ourselves are, what happens when this thing goes right? I mean, at this point, the bet is really behind the founders, their potential for building whatever they can demonstrate in terms of the ability to execute. But what happens when things go right, it gets very exciting, right? Like how big is this market? How much will customers actually love this? And versus maybe a later stage investing, if you're a Series B or beyond investor, it tends to be a little bit more quantitative, a little bit more clinical, of just like, let's see the last 5 years of trailing EBITDA profits and losses and so forth, and see whether we can get the numbers to match up. I'm not saying that those investors don't have a lot of skill too, but it's a different kind of model of adjusting for risk.
Right. I mean, with the early seed, early stage startups, there's so much to prove. And once you move into the later stages, your A, your B's, your C's, I mean, you use the word clinical, but there really is kind of an economic template to how to look at these startups after they've gone through a series, a seed or something super early. But I want to talk about this idea of this distaste, this hatred for your early experiences with venture capital. I mean, this is something worth digging into. What made those experiences so horrible that it profoundly affected you, that you seriously considered when starting Hustle Fund that we had to do it differently? Talk us through that.
So there's a lot of irony here in terms of why I have so much distaste in venture just generally, at least historically, is that there are very few people who can emerge as easy winners in early stage fundraising. And it's actually ironic because it's people like me. So if you look at the people who get the most capital at the pre-seed and seed stages, it's a really
of people. Bluntly, it's white or Asian men who went to a Stanford or MIT, graduated with a computer science degree, worked at a Facebook or a Google. If you fit these literally phenotypes, just like how you look, as well as some of these pedigree markers, then you'll have a disproportionately easier time in raising capital. But you start to run into problems if you're a woman, an underrepresented minority, or even things like you don't live in San Francisco, but you live in Atlanta, right?
It's true.
Different kinds of biases come into play there. And I just fundamentally never believed that these kinds of pedigree markers or these kinds of narrow set of men were actually correlated to the best performing companies over time. And when we began to look at the data, because we had access to tons of it, 500 startups and other kinds of ecosystems that we are a part of, while we were at 500, we realized that actually, truly, that narrow set of like race, gender, and pedigree actually isn't necessarily the best leading indicators to base judgment on the best founders.
And that makes a lot of sense. And this is going to be another place, Eric, where I hold you to your quotes. If you go to hustlefund.vc, you will find on their website through the slides is that Eric said a great team is a criteria for success. True. However, the current startup world and venture capital world relies too much on the pedigree of the startup team and not the ideas itself. And then you rolled into a next slide and you talked about how you guys, bottom dollar, bottom line, you guys invest in startups who hustle and execute quickly. And so it's great that you're aligned, obviously, in this interview, talking to me about your thesis and how you look at startups. But it's great that you have that alignment to what you've already said on your website. Pedigree is not a great indicator of success. And so what have you found beyond just the team and beyond just the hustle and execution? What are some areas that you look at when it comes to early stage startups that you're willing to fund?
Well, let's talk about the hustle component first of all, and then I'll tell you about the 5 pillars I look for when I assess a team. So what we find is the normalizing trait that cuts through all the noise and is the factor that we, number one, look for in assessing the potential of a team is this quality called hustle in our mind. So we define hustle as great execution and high velocity, those 2 components together. In our studies, we found that teams that just ship a lot of code, run a lot of experiments, drive very hard sales pipeline processes, whatever is the right execution metric for measuring and sprinting against, those teams that just do this well week over week, month over month, year after year, just tend to grind out the best businesses over time, right? And the exciting thing about hustle is that great hustlers look like anyone and come from anywhere. It turns out that women are as good as men or as poor as men at this. White people and black people can be both good or bad at this, etc. Right? People in San Francisco, people in Atlanta or Toronto or Southeast Asia, whatever.
Are you meaning to tell me that hustle has no color to it? Hustle can be applied anywhere, is what you're saying?
Well, let's put it this way. I think that hustle is a very high differentiator of teams because we find that it's quite binary when you see it, when a team is really operationally effective. Now, the thing that kind of pulls me back a little bit from saying that hustle is all that it takes is that I got to recognize the fact that that privilege does matter, right? Like if I come from a super wealthy family that has a famous name and I fit like the white Asian phenotype, I mean, there's going to be more shots on goal likely that founder will have to figure out their startup. So it always plays a major role. But for us, cutting through the noise and just assessing for teams execution is just the model that we think will be the winning way to find teams that may be underrepresented, that have high potential, where we can find them before other VCs can realize what they've missed. So when we assess for a team, just to get to your question of like, how do we assess? There's really 5 pillars I think that we look for, but also many other seed investors look for. It's team, problem, solution, market, and traction. So I'll go through each very quickly. Team. I want to see a team that has relevant skill set for solving the problem that they want to solve. So if founder Peter approaches me from a finance background and says, I want to create a brand new cancer drug, that's hard for me to reconcile unless he actually has relevant background. If the team is not just like a solo founder, but also a pair of co-founders, ideally I'd like to see them working on projects before and demonstrated that they can ship together. Problem. A very clear, crisp statement of what you're actually trying to solve for and how you arrived at that problem. How you arrived at, I think, is the one that a lot of founders miss. So if you say that we need Uber for families, like I kind of understand that, but I want to understand like the customer development that happened behind, like what kinds of families they talk to. Were they upper middle class? Were they lower class, etc.? So the work to arrive to the problem statement is so critical. Solution is generally the product or service that you're trying to produce to solve this problem. Market, this is a very important one for us, is the market, the total addressable market that this team is trying to solve for, measured in the billions of dollars so it can support what we call a venture backable outcome, one that can produce lots and lots of money back to the founders, but also our fund and our investors. And then traction. This one is where I'm the most forgiving, which is there any evidence of early pilots, customer acquisition, retention that the team can point to show that they shipped, but also acquired some users? We believe actually in a precept that I think Justin Can tweeted not too long ago, which is first-time founders obsessed about the product, second-time founders obsessed around distribution. And we actually really index hard on distribution as a skill because we think that great sales, great distribution can even beat better products over time, even if you're slightly inferior in the market. So those are the 5 things that we're really testing for and looking for. Well, let me pause here though to see, Peter, if you have any reactions to that.
Well, there's some great ideas here. And the thing is that going through knowing you and knowing your fund and knowing kind of the thesis as well as where you've come from and kind of the ideas that help formulate this fund, you're not a diversity focused fund, but I think a lot of your philosophy and a lot of your worldview and a lot of the way that you engage with venture capital and engage with the investors, engage with entrepreneurs as well, is that you're purposely and intentional in having an open mind beyond just what you see. And I'd love to dig a little bit more into that. What created that? Was it just because you had such a distasteful and experience in the beginning that created this, whoa, there seems to be an unfair way of going about this. There seems to be a lot of focus on X when I believe Y is far more true. Was it through those experiences, or was it just the way that you are? Is it your personality, your character? Walk us through that a little bit more, because I know you're not diversity focused, but it really oozes from your personality. I think it's a valuable thing to be far more open-minded.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I mean, so there's a lot of things I want to unpack here. First, I want to explain how our investment model works and how do we actually view hustle. And then let me get back to your core question, like, why do we care about this stuff?
Yeah.
So our model is we are very quick within one meeting in deciding whether we want to write a $25,000 check into any given team. Okay, any general partner, myself, Elizabeth, Shin, can write that 25K check into any team without consulting the other. That's how our model works. And once we write that check, the partner is then the sponsor for that company to work with that company over 4 to 6 weeks on the growth project. And it's during that period of time where we can observe their execution, help on some meaningful area of growth in the business. But the teams are also judging us in two-way due diligence to see whether we're actually adding value. And that's actually part of the way that we're trying to balance the power between founders and VCs, is that we can't just sit back and be a dumb check. Like, we won't, otherwise we can't earn the right to continue in the journey with the founder. And if there's a really good fit across the hustle of both teams, we like each other, we like working with each other, we think that the market's great, then that's when we'll concentrate a much larger check into your business in the next financing round to make you a core position within our fund, and we can have a longer term journey set up that way. So small check, growth project, big check. Now,
I want to interject here. I think I love this model because it gives the entrepreneur a voice into the system. Having been on, and you know this, Eric, having been more on the receiving side of funding in my past, it's sometimes when I've been at the table, it's been hard because you're asking for money. And frankly, the VCs and angels, whoever on the other side, they have all the power. Let's be intellectually honest. In an aesthetic worldview of sorts, they have all the power. But so much of the entrepreneur's voice needs to be part of that decision. And I love the fact that you're willing to give a small check, but allow yourself to date the entrepreneur, to date the project, and really allow them to have, is it fair for me to say that they have an equal voice into your system as you make decisions together?
I mean, honestly, not quite. We still have, I'm sure that dynamics feel like we still have more power, and we're still trying to figure out ways to make it feel like an equal voice. And that's part of this journey too, is that there's still a lot to figure out. But I do want to get back to the question about like why we care about this model and why I even introduced it this way. The thing that I really like about this 25K check model is that it allows us to take a lot of risk. You know, we're doing this after one meeting. It's kind of like a gut call. And the goal here is to be about 60% certain about the business when I write that check, and to get to 95% certainty after we do the growth project, if it really piques our curiosity. So the big reason why we believe in this model is I would be lying to you and to your listeners and your viewers right now if I were to say that I am not stymied day to day with racism and sexism. Just straight on. I grew up in a rich part of Michigan, went to rich kid high school, went to a rich kids college, worked at Facebook. You know, I live in the Bay Area. All my neighbors are Facebookers. In 38 years, I think I've been conditioned through implicit bias, but and also explicit bias against people that don't look like me, people who aren't from my world. And the thing that scares me about that is that I think this actually blinds me on opportunities and great people too. Just
Wow.
the natural kind of implicit biases that have been built within me for nearly 40 years. So here's why this model is so important. At the 25K check level, because we have so much ability to take a lot of risk and be uncomfortable ourselves on certain deals and founders,
I love that.
this allows us to actually set up a very diverse portfolio at the top of the funnel. And guess what happens? We are consistently surprised that the founders that we didn't think were going to be great turn out to be incredibly amazing. I'm thinking of the Black female founder from Minneapolis who, no VC wants to touch at the pre-seed stage, but turns out to be one of the best operators that we've seen. Native American founder that I'm talking to right now. I mean, like in Albuquerque, like who goes to Albuquerque? Like, it's
Breaking Bad, guys.
Yeah, this hustle model just shows us that like when you normalize and really focus on the hustle component, it helps me to cut through my own institutional biases. And what we're trying to prove from this is like when we make more money in investing in a diverse portfolio than other VC funds, it'll force other VCs to actually adopt our style of investing as well.
Maybe you don't want them to take on your style because it's actually working and it's actually valuable. One of the things, I have to say this, I love this. It's almost like the way that you look at entrepreneurs is a forcing mechanism to ensure that you stay a good person. It's like because if you allow yourself to have these behaviors that infect you over time, that might preclude you from opportunities, right? Intentionally looking at entrepreneurs and saying, I want an open mind. I want to take that risk with someone who looks completely different from me, who acts completely different from me, has a worldview and a faith in this market that I could never even conjure up, allows you to really stretch yourself as a person and ensure that you're not blinding yourself to the opportunities that could exist right in front of your face. Is that fair?
I mean, I think you're seeing it way too generously. I mean, there's a couple things here. I mean, like, yes, I would like to think that I am a good person. I think the reason I'm a good person is, frankly, I married a great person. And she's in the diversity and inclusion space. She's a life coach. My wife really taught me so much about why this stuff matters in the past decade. So I don't think I came from that mindset naturally, but I've been inspired and I learned from great peers on why I care about this stuff. I want to remove a little bit of altruism here and let's just talk about money. Okay. So like, if I'm creating a VC, this is the thing that really triggers me about diversity funds or people who invest in diversity is almost implied in that statement is you're lowering the bar, right? Like I feel this way in terms of how people are framing it. To me, that's so silly. It's just like, I'm just being able to view more deals and pick from the very best people that I see from more deals. And they don't have to look like white Asian men from Stanford. And I will make more money than you because I'm doing that. And diversity is actually the reason why we make more money, right? So the thing that I really like about this model is we try to pair capitalism with social belief. I mean, fundamentally, I want like a more equitable society, of course. But the way that I want to arrive there is actually through capitalism, right? Because if we prove it works through capitalism, then it'll force other people who are capitalistic motivated to join us in this journey. And I don't want to be the greedy person that just takes it. It's like, eventually, like Peter, like, you have kids, I have kids, like we have to leave something for the next generation. I have a daughter, I want her to have a chill time raising money, however she wants to do it, if she decides to go down that path, or other, at least women like her, or not like her. Right.
Absolutely, man. I love this idea. Capitalism matched with social beliefs. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit more? Capitalism with social beliefs. If I were to take a stab at it real quick, and I really like this term, capitalism with social beliefs, is that capitalism really has no boundaries. And we as humans, we as people with our own beliefs, right, we often can create boundaries. We can often create constraints in which we don't allow for capitalism to really thrive, which means it doesn't matter if what color you are, or what sex you are, where your interests are, where you're from, Albuquerque, New Mexico, which clearly no one visits. But it allows you and opens up your mind and ensures that you are looking at the entire spectrum. I love this idea, matched with your thesis of throwing $25,000 and being high risk. What are some of the highest risks, or not highest risk, but what are some of the risks that you've taken that have really, really panned out that you didn't expect would pan out?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there's so many of these. I'll tell you one story. So there's this guy that we invested in. I'm not gonna blow up the spot here, but like when we met him, he had gone through this very painful pivot. He lost all of his employees and co-founders. He was a solopreneur, essentially working on this really great software, SaaS software product. That's when we got to meet him. Honestly, when I met him, I had a lot of implicit bias like checking. I was like, okay, this guy's an immigrant. He is a diminutive kind of guy. He's got a funny accent. You know, he doesn't have like some of the American smoothness and polish of his pitch. And then within 20 minutes of this conversation, I got really curious. Within 2 weeks of the growth project, I was completely sold that this guy is going to be a crazy winner, right? And I think it was looking back, like when I see this journey, it feels very natural, but for a lot of VCs who like see this one guy, solo founder, no traction, has a very interesting idea, immigrant background, you know, not white or Asian. I think it's very easy to be dismissive of this guy. You know, it's not polished. He doesn't have a warm intro, etc. But he just turned it around, and this is one of the fastest growing companies in our portfolio right now. I'm so proud that we are part of this journey with him.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but again, like we have that model where we can take a lot of risk, and it's so exciting when I'm proven wrong. And it turns out that I'm wrong a lot, at least 50% of the time on people. And that's exciting.
I'm 50%. I'm 50% wrong 100% of the time.
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. Exactly.
Sounds great. I love this idea, and you. If I were to borrow some words from this individual that had an interesting accent, didn't have the American polish in his pitch, would it be a fair statement for me to say that you might have been one of the first individuals to believe in him, in what he's doing? Is that fair?
Our fund was the first to invest in his idea.
Okay, good, because I'm glad you answered yes. Because I want to ask you a tough question here that I thought about before we got on here, and I wanted to ask, before you started Hustle Fund, and as we move, I'm moving back just a little bit here. Before you started Hustle Fund, who was an individual that believed in you, and why did that make a difference? I really wanted, because I thought every interview I'm doing, Eric, I'm trying to think of like, this person, this individual with my preconceived notions, my ideas around them, the way that I look at them, like what is something, as I stare at their picture, what is something I really would love and I'm curious about? And you know what came to mind for you? Who first believed in you? Do you have a story around that? Is there something that you could share in terms of an individual that believed in you, that helped propel you to where you are today?
Let me tell you a quick story. This is about 9 months before the formation of Hustle Fund, when we filed for the SEC to begin Hustle Fund. So I come home from whatever I was doing that day, I can't remember, and I talked to my wife. I said, Elizabeth, my co-founder, and I have this great idea. This is this fund that we're going to call Hustle Fund. And this is the rough model behind it. And I'm thinking we do this. Let's take a $500,000 mortgage out of our house, use that money as seed capital to run the model of Hustle Fund based on the model I just described to you, Peter. And what we'll do is then, once we raise money for the fund, we'll warehouse those deals, meaning we'll sell it into the fund and get our money back and pay back our house. And my wife, she looks at me and says, I think that's a great idea. You should go for this.
That's awesome.
So, I mean, this is the thing that I always come back to is when I look at everything good that's happened in my life. I had a great childhood, great parents, like they're tremendous influences, but the true inflection point was meeting my wife 19 years ago. We started dating actually 17 years ago. And she represents all the values that I've always wanted to aspire to. So I married upwards, but even more than that, she's the person that always shakes me by the shoulders and says, you need to dream 10x more or 100x more from what you are currently thinking right now, and pushes me up that mountain, right?
Wow.
So I'd say that, like, you know, hands down, it's my wife that has always believed in me. Before I started my entrepreneurial career, she saw something in this very rough and highly insecure little like 19-year-old dude. And like, it's been an incredible journey ever since.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. There has to be some lessons there somewhere. I mean, when it comes to co-founders or, you know, a couple of dudes that are coming together, there has to be a strong belief. There has to be a strong ability to say, hey, we can do this. And it seems, and this is not the first time, this is the second or third time that you've name dropped your wife. You said you married a great person in the beginning of this interview. So is that required for great teams to succeed? You got to marry the right people?
I don't think so. I mean, like, it helps. In my case, it really helped. But I mean, there are other believers that you can have in your social network that push you forward. And so here's a concept that I talk about a lot with founders that I actually learned from my wife, which is this notion of sabotaging voices or imposter syndrome. You know, so there's this part of your brain called the amygdala that controls fight or flight, right? So if you see a crocodile in your path, Peter, you're like, oh my gosh, should I punch it in the face or just run away? Probably run away, right?
I'd probably run away.
It's your amygdala making that decision for you. And like, it's keeping you alive. That's like the core purpose of it. Now, the amygdala can go a little bit haywire for startup founders where you can be racked by stress. You know, like if as your company is growing and the ups and downs, like it actually triggers the same kind of fight or flight. And you're feeling that day after day after day. And this voice inside you kind of builds that just consistently tells you that, you know, Eric, you can't do this. Eric, you're not good enough. Eric, you're not qualified. And it's a recursive kind of negative feeling. But when you have the right kind of support system around you, your spouse, your friends, your parents, whomever it is, other founders, sometimes during those moments when you're being so overcome by your sabotaging voices, they can see you better than you can see yourself.
Wow,
and when they can
powerful.
call you out and say like, you're being ridiculous, or maybe not ridiculous, like you don't realize like how great you are at this moment. I'm telling you, you're great. And I totally believe in you. I'm not even worried. You need to find those kinds of reminders somehow, right? To dig yourself out of that place.
And
see your therapist, your friends, whatever, right?
And I will have to say that and maybe our viewers out there, our listeners out there might not be able to see what I have seen and to know what I have known. But I will tell you guys out there, Eric BAHN is certainly one of those individuals who exudes this. You are like the fastest email responder, period. You're always responding with encouragement. You're always responding with let's meet. And I'm receiving this a lot from my brother. And I mean, this is more than just, hey, a belief that, hey, you should surround yourself with great founders, great people, support groups, people who believe in you. But I would go even farther and say you are someone who actually does that because you believe in it so strongly with the entrepreneurs you invest with and the entrepreneurs that you support. You're one of the biggest fans, if I can put those words in your mouth. Wouldn't you say that you're one of the biggest fans of your people that you've invested in?
So you've gone through this journey a couple of times now, Peter, as a founder, and like, you understand how lonely, depressing, sad the journey is 90% of the time, I think. But then like when it's working, it's the most existential high that you can ever experience. Like for me, the way that I sort of put it is like on the good moments and good days of my startup journey previously, it felt like I had a direct connection to God. That was just like, thank you so much for putting me on earth to solve this problem. Right? And that's kind of what you kind of live for as a founder. But most of the time it's eating glass and building a house of cards. So I remember those moments when I was curled up on the couch crying with $250 left in the checking account, like racked with fear of how I was going to pay my employees the next day. Right? I mean, like, and that's a journey that is surprisingly consistent across like so many founders that I meet. And it fills me with compassion. Right. And like, I know like the kind of partner I wish I had during those moments that I tried to aspire to be. And honestly, I fail a lot too. Like I pull same bullshit like VC moves too, being too slow sometimes. I mean, like I'm not always that great on email or responses or even like saying the right things. But it's something that is like a journey for me that I'm really trying to get better at.
Awesome. I love it. We are getting close to the end here, and I want to ask you one final question before we go, and I'll give you the floor for people to learn more about you and your fund. But there was something that was rising in my gut a little bit during this conversation. We've talked a lot about teams. We talk about pedigrees and why those aren't great. The usual standard markers aren't usually great indicators for success. Keeping an open mind and almost having forcing mechanisms to say, hey, there really are more opportunities, more people, more ways to look at problems. We've talked about a lot of this. And one of the things that rose up in my gut, and I wrote this here, is how do you know? And I guess you can only speak for yourself here, Eric, but how do you know when you're doing your best work? How do you know?
For myself, like my
Yes.
perspective when I'm doing my best work.
How do you know? Yeah, for you and yourself, how do you know that you're doing your best work? What are some ways that you can describe that? And maybe that can help individuals or entrepreneurs think about how can they ensure that they do their best work? Is it just merely surrounding yourself with great people and support? What are some other ways that you ensure that you're doing your best work?
I'll answer this really personally and very specifically to myself because I only have my own truth to tell.
Absolutely.
So there's a period of time where I was working for a large company and I got so obsessed with this community called FIRE, Financially Independent Retire Early. Right? If you go on Reddit, there's
That's
like
cool.
huge FIRE communities, go to r/financial independence. It's this whole community of like, how do you get to enough wealth as quickly as possible and savings rates so that you can just retire as quickly as possible. And I found myself so entrenched in this community when I was working at this big company. And later, as I unpacked it, I realized like it was because I was so miserable at my job. Actually, that I was dreaming about escaping. I was running away from something, not running towards something. Once I started, and I felt this feeling before in previous companies I started, but like at Hustle Fund, I found a mission that I'm running towards. And one of the things that has been a secondary consequence to that is I just stopped looking at those FIRE communities. I don't care about the early retirement stuff anymore because I love the work. Like it's so much like joy for what I do every day. Like on many levels. On the most basic level, it's just like I have partners that I work with that I truly love. We have a long relationship with each other. I met them the same week I met my wife 19 years ago. So long relationship. I love their spouses. I love their kids. I love their dogs. And that's one level of joy. The second is actually the mission behind the work. There's definitely stuff I don't like about the job. Like I don't like reading legal term sheets. I'm still terrible at that. But the mission and ethos behind what we're trying to represent in our funds, whether they're going to be successful or not, like it almost doesn't matter what the financial outcome is going to be like for us or like, like longer term. It's just like, I think it's gonna be great, but what we're trying to do in really introducing something new in terms of a mindset of how you approach founders and work with them and the respect that you give them, like I think is something that's pretty innovative on our part. And that I think just fulfills my mission. So I think there's like a joy level, but also like a mission level here that I feel. And I just noticed that like I'm not in any rush to retire early. In fact, it's the opposite. I'm starting to think about ways to live longer lately. Just like, what can I be doing in terms of like changing my diet and my exercise and live longer so I can continue doing this. And that's sort of a new thing for me. Only in the last couple of years have I really, really felt this way.
That's really powerful. I mean, I love hearing the terms mission focused, purpose focused, these types of things. And it really allows you to enjoy the process. Enjoy the process and the people that you're working for. It's interesting that when you're trying to escape, you'll look for an outcome, right? Yeah. When you were trying to escape, you're looking for an outcome, which is how can I stop this pain? And the answer is these Reddit subreddits called FIRE, so I can be financially independent as fast as possible. But what you were really looking for is purposeful work. Engaging work with individuals that cared about something that you were essentially aligned to from a mission or a purpose or a worldview standpoint. And I really love that.
I'll summarize in the way that my wife summarized me. So she says that most people are running away from something. Very few people are running towards something.
Wow.
But when you identify what you're running towards, that is actually where you can unlock a very satisfying life, right? And I find that when I use that framework and apply that to a lot of people I know in my life, it's totally true. It's like, there's very few people I know who can clearly define what they're running toward, right? I mean, like I look at my colleagues, my neighbors, working at these great jobs, Facebook and Google, making tons of money, buying beautiful homes, the RV, the Teslas, racking up the expenses, going to nice resorts. They're running from something, actually. Like, I mean, like they just seem inherently really unhappy or unsatisfied still. So, yeah, anyway, I don't have a real conclusion to that other than like, you know,
I think
for thought for your viewers.
No, it's great. I think it's great. It's powerful. It's something that I'll probably want to discuss on a later podcast in the future. Eric BAHN, thanks so much. Eric BAHN from Hustle Fund. I'm going to give you the final words here. Where can we find more information about you, your fund, your co-founders, whatever? How can we find more information about you? So those who are out there, because on almost every page of your website, it's like, talk to us. Tell us about how you're going to hustle. How can we find out?
So first, I just want to recognize and thank you, Peter, for this opportunity. I'm incredibly honored to be among some of your first guests for this new series, and you know, I don't take that lightly. It's truly an amazing opportunity. So thank you for that. Pretty easy to find us. So I'm really active on Twitter to start. So at Eric BAHN, ERICBAHN is one way to begin like learning to hear more about and philosophies. I'm a very philosophical amateur philosopher. And then our website's hustlefund.vc, hustlefund.victorcharlie. And that's a great way to find all of our contact information, learn a little bit more about the ethos behind Hustle Fund. Yeah, so those are the kind of the two ways I'd recommend finding us.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks so much, Eric from Hustle Fund. And I'm going to leave the audience with this question as we roll out. Don't run away from things. Find something to run towards. That's very, very assertive, very initiative, very mission and purpose oriented. What should you be running towards today? Some food for thought from our two amateur philosophers, me, the VC hunter, Peter Saddington, and Eric BAHN from Hustle Fund. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next show. Wow, guys. What an awesome interview with Eric BAHN from Hustle Fund. I was showing him all the notes. Look at all these notes. Look at all these notes that I wrote down during our interview. I just learned so much about Eric, his story, and why he does what he does. So I want to highlight a couple things that I wrote down here that I just think are really important. First and foremost, if you are a hustler, if you are a driver, if you are an individual who's looking, obviously, to get funded, you got to hang out. You got to check out Hustle Fund at hustlefund.vc. Eric BAHN, Elizabeth, and Shia and Co. Just check them out. That's first and foremost. But a couple things that I really loved about Eric's honesty and candor during this interview were the ideas around diversity and Hustle Fund really emerging as a fund that was created because of the experiences that Eric and I'm sure Elizabeth and I'm sure Shian have experienced in the past, where they might have been unfairly judged or not given an opportunity or not given a voice merely because they don't fit in the general stereotype of what a startup entrepreneur needs to look like. You know, they're not coming out of the right pedigree as Eric had said. I love that Hustle Fund really is looking and being intentional and ensuring that they're looking at all the opportunities out there and not merely the ones that fit the cookie cutter mold. This is a powerful, powerful nuance, and I think it's important that we don't forget. And I would go even farther. One of the reasons why Hustle Fund has succeeded is because they've been intentional with ensuring that they don't blind themselves to the opportunities just because of their own internal biases, their own internal worldviews, and the way that they generally, as individuals, see the world. It's good to have that, what I call a forcing mechanism. He said that I was giving him too much credit, but I think it really is. It's a forcing mechanism to ensure that not only is Hustle Fund opening itself to all opportunities, but secondarily, it helps the individuals be better people. Just be better people. And so I love the things that we talked about. Here's another one. I loved his 5 points. His 5 points around what he looks for as in an entrepreneur. Do you have the team? Do you have the skills? What's the problem? Can you concisely tell us the problem? What's the solution, right? What's the product and service? Do you have a market, which is the 4th one, right? And I like this idea. Can we look at the market as an opportunity for billions, right? As an investment opportunity in the billions. So if you're going to be pitching them and they're going to be giving you 25 grand, guys, you better be able to look at the market in the terms of billions, because these guys want to get paid back. And obviously traction. I think this is one he did say, Eric did say that he is the most lenient with, he has the most flexibility with, because if you remember, Hustle Fund is a company who invests in, what do they say? Hilariously early hustlers. People who don't fit the mold, don't fit the pedigree. But as he said, hustle really transcends any color, creed, race, whatever. Doesn't matter. Hustle is the name of the game. And from what I understand, Hustle Fund really is aptly named. I had a great time talking with Eric BAHN, and I can't wait to have even more conversations with some of your favorite venture capitalists out there. If you want to find more information on Eric BAHN and on this podcast, make sure that you find your way over to vchunting.com/Eric BAHN. Thanks again for joining us in this episode of VC Hunting with me, your big game hunter, Peter Saddington. I'll see you guys again next episode.